Yeah, like right there. Yeah? 100. Finger. I have a cut under my nail.
Those are the worst.
I have basketball tonight. Do you know basketball practice is at 5:15 tomorrow?
That's actually psychotic.
Like, there's no.
I have to leave my house at 4:30.
That's actually insane. Why are they having it in
Sorry,
school?
4:45.
It's like after school.
4:45.
Why can't you guys not practice after school?
Because there's no time.
Thank you.
Shouldn't you guys get priority?
Dude, that's like.
Yeah, but Carson and Richie have their all-star football game tomorrow afternoon.
That's insane.
Practice.
He said he has to go to practice.
Oh!
Our practice, our practice is at 5:15. I have to leave my house at 4:45.
Squeeze. That's insane.
Do it! Like, you're gonna have to be in bed at like.
Dude, I wouldn't even play basketball.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
what
always
that's
that
what
time.
No, it's normally in the afternoon.
It's just like that.
All right.
Yeah, it's
But
actually
Dylan,
crazy.
don't you have practice till 9 tonight too?
No, mine is, I'm on varsity. I'm from 3 to 5.
Oh, someone told me it was. Oh, that's JV.
Basketball.
Okay.
Our practice tomorrow is at 5:15 in the morning.
Yeah, that's
That
really
is too
crazy.
early to be.
No,
Honestly.
I would have been crying.
I don't wake up till like after 6.
No, like I find that out and I'm crying.
That's what time I normally wake up.
Why'd you wake up so early?
I wake up at 7 o'clock.
I get out of bed at like 7.
5:15 in the morning. You have to have Brady's making your lunch.
Yeah.
I don't even like get ready.
Okay, wait, but why is your practice so early? Because ours isn't until 6 at night. No, it's
Lizzie
not.
here today?
Yeah, she was going to the bathroom.
Haley?
So how come yours is so early but ours is so late?
Because ours is at 5:15 in the
So listen, what
morning.
time is your practice?
From 6 to 8.
At night.
I'll be in bed.
No, at night. At night.
I'd rather have it be 6 8 at night than 5 o'clock in the morning.
Still, I'll be in bed.
Yeah, I'll be there
Well, no,
at
I
5
have
o'clock.
basketball and then cheer.
Oh, wait, you're doing both? What time is cheer? Or do you, can I get my
Cheers is at 7.
Oh my god.
Yeah. No, I could. So you're gonna have to be sweaty and nasty all day.
Yep.
All right.
Oh, you're gonna have to sit there.
So I'm handing back some
No, like at the desk.
quizzes and your opener for last week.
I gotta make one.
Uh,
A 91 is crazy for me.
Katie's here today, right?
Yes. Okay,
Palin?
Dylan, give me my chips back.
Haley?
Give me my chips.
Haley?
I don't like those kind of.
Exactly.
I'm gonna start bringing you guys.
Blake?
I'm gonna start bringing
I
you
still think
guys.
it's 5.
Okay, that's not me.
My pretty house when everyone's missing tomorrow.
No, no,
Listen.
no.
Yeah.
All right.
Everyone in the class is getting
So here's the game plan for this week, guys and girls. Today, we're going to finish up with chapter 11, and tomorrow we're going to start chapter 12. I am going to share with you the final PowerPoints on chapter 11. There is a separate PowerPoint which we will not get to today that will be including information on how slaves resisted and how slaves worked to improve their situation. We will not get to that segment in the notes today. Tomorrow we will start chapter 12, and you'll have an assignment due for Friday on chapter 12. You'll have an inquisitive assignment and a vocab quiz on your chapter 12 terms. We're going to start a new PowerPoint tomorrow, new chapter tomorrow. So you should have chapter 12 read for tomorrow's class. When we left off last, we were about to discuss religious life in the South. Again, we're talking about life in the South for Southern whites, and we're going to talk next about clergy and religious leaders. And we're going to talk about a topic today that a lot of you might have difficulty grasping at first, and that is the idea that white Southerners white Southerners, while wielding a lot of influence, white Southern Christians, and when we see the term clergy, what are we referring to when we see the term clergy? Father Tom, who used to be at Immaculate Conception, you guys remember Father Tom? Member of the clergy. What do we mean by clergy? We talk about a member of the clergy. Yeah, a church leader. Might be a priest, a minister, a nun, N-U-N. You guys all know what a nun is, right? A nun is a Catholic woman, church leader, okay? So we talk about clergy. They held influential positions in Southern society. And the thing that we're going to look at briefly today is that many Southern clergy members are going to support the expansion of slavery by providing religious justifications for slavery. Now, let me ask you a question, kind of outside the scope of the reading for this and outside the scope of maybe. Hello.
Hi, this is Liz.
Thank you.
I hate that class so much.
Now, the issue that we're going to talk about today is what possibly, well, let's just back up a second. When you think about Christianity and people who might be Christian, I'm a Catholic myself, okay? Roman Catholic, a branch of Christianity. Why would Christians oppose slavery then and now? What reasons, what justifications would people who are Christian have for opposing the institution of slavery? Think about Quakers. Think about religious groups that might have opposed slavery. On what grounds was slavery opposed by Christians?
They're not being treated as humans, I guess saying I guess what they could support that slavery should be there is that they don't treat
Well, back up just a sec. I don't want to talk about why they might think slavery should be there. I want you to try to argue from a point of view of a Christian who opposes slavery. Why might a Christian who is against slavery, white Christian against slavery, be against slavery?
Everyone should be treated equal.
Yeah. The basic rule of Christianity is that all people are equal in the eyes of God. Treat others as you would want to be treated. That's the foundation of Christianity. So I want to ask you, as we go into our discussion today, why in the world, or how in the world, is there going to be a religious justification for slavery? In other words, how in the world is there going to be a group of Southern Christians who are going to point to the Bible and say, Bible says slavery is okay, so therefore it's okay that we own slaves? Anybody familiar with the parts of the Bible that might justify slavery for white Southerners? Because the Bible is going to be used for both sides, opponents of slavery and supporters of slavery, to kind of advance their cause. You can see from the opposing of slavery, you can see from the opposition to slavery, that the Bible is clearly going to be Christians are taught to treat other people as human beings, to treat other people like Christ would treat other people, to treat other people with respect and with dignity. And yet Southerners are going to point to the same book and say, you know what? Northerners are wrong. Abolitionists are wrong. Southerners are going to look to specific segments of the Bible that talk about slavery during the ancient time of the Israelites who were held captive in Egypt, and they're going to point to the Christian Bible, especially the New Testament, not really coming out in any form or way, shape, or manner opposing slavery. So many Southerners are going to argue that because slavery was not specifically condemned in the Christian Bible, then slavery must be what? Okay, exactly. And this is going to form the foundation, the religious foundation for Southerners saying, white Southerners saying that they have the justification in the Bible to own slaves. Their citations of the Bible are very selective, however. Their citations are very selective. One book of the Bible actually tells the story of a man who is taken, who is removed from slavery and is brought back to his master by someone in the story. And the Southerners would look at that story and point to that as, well, if it's in the Bible that a slave was brought back to his master, then it must be what? Then it must be okay to own slaves. So the arguments, in a lot of ways, are weak and not very consistent. But regardless, they are going to argue that the Christian Bible, okay, that the Christian Bible, the Holy Bible, is going to support slavery because of what they mention specifically about slavery with the ancient Israelites, and what they don't mention about slavery, no real condemnation. And actually, Christians will say that in the New Testament, which is the 4 books of the Bible that were written after the birth of Christ, in the New Testament, Jesus never specifically spoke out against the institution of slavery. Now, what they're leaving out is, Jesus might not have never spoken out specifically against slavery, but he certainly spoke out specifically about how to treat our neighbors, did he not? Even if you're not a Christian, okay, and some of you might be, some of you may not be, even if you're not a Christian, Jesus is pretty well known was someone who taught others to love one another, to treat others as they would want to be treated themselves, and to not just love one another, but to love your enemies. To love your enemies. So I found a video that I want to share with you. It's very short, it's only a couple minutes, but it talks about this, the clergy and the Southern argument that slaveholding was right. And there was another belief to this, by the way. There was another belief among white Southerners that because slaves came from the African continent and many had not yet been exposed to Christianity, many white Southerners felt that because they weren't enlightened by Christianity, that somehow they were savages, and that they needed the guidance and the leadership of their masters in order to flourish, in order to become better people. There was this attitude among white Southerners that slaves were benefiting. They were benefiting from institution of slavery because they were being looked after, and they were being taken care of, and they were being educated by white Southerners. This was a common attitude among white Southerners. As horrible as that sounds, many white Southerners believed that. They believed that Africans were savages because they were not exposed to Christ. They were savages because many of them had not been exposed to Christianity before they were taken in bondage. So the act of slavery itself by many whites was considered some type of salvation on their part towards slaves. In other words, people who owned slaves were doing African slaves a favor by taking them and enslaving them for their lives. This was the rationale, or this was used as a justification for slavery. Both opponents though, and supporters of slavery are going to cite different parts of the Bible. Let's take a look at the clip that highlights what I'm talking about.
Using the Christian Bible to justify slavery in the American South. Slaveholders were always looking for reasons to justify their practice of treating humans as property. Religion played a major role in the justification of human bondage. The Old Testament had many pro-slavery examples, proving it was commonplace among the Israelites. As it is popular and true that Israelites were held in bondage in Egypt, slavery was also a dominant aspect of Israel's society. Christian slave owners of the early United States often pointed out that nowhere in the New Testament did Jesus condemn slavery. The story of Philemon, the runaway slave, who St. Paul returned to his master, was also quoted as proof the Christian Bible condoned slavery. Bishops and ministers of the American South felt that through slavery, they were saving African souls, liberating them from their savage-like ways. They believed the African race were most sinful and sexually impulsive, who needed to be broken to be controlled and submissive while still strong and healthy. Those who thought the slavery was not justified in the Bible were in the minority and considered radical. Christian institutions like Georgetown University faced scrutiny for their past-rooted slave holdings. In 1838, men, women, and children were sold to save the Catholic University in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. What men, women, and children...
So Georgetown University is a Catholic college in Washington, D.C. It's still there today. Very popular. If you're a sports fan, it's part of the Big East in men's and women's sports. Big East, Georgetown basketball, the Hoyas. They were founded by the Jesuits, which are a branch, a group of priests, Catholic priests. Well, in the 1840s, Georgetown University was facing financial difficulty, and they sold a large number of women and children as slaves in order to boost their financial standing. So here you have a Catholic university, a Catholic college that was engaging in the slave trade, that was engaging in the selling and buying of human beings. And Georgetown has faced a lot of scrutiny, even to this day, for this past decision to engage in the slave trade. And the idea here is not so much that they did it, but the fact that why they were doing it. They were engaging in the slave trade because there was a popular and common belief among Christian institutions that slavery was just and that slavery was moral, because the slave needed the leadership, they needed the guidance, they needed the direction that the slave master was going to provide. So, and again, as horrible as that sounds, that was the mindset for many white Southerners. What part of the country, by the way, is Georgetown University? Okay. It's in Washington, D.C. today, which would be technically part of the American South. It's south of Pennsylvania. The Mason-Dixon line between the northern states and the southern states is basically Pennsylvania and Maryland. So D.C. would be south of that, but D.C. is smack dab in the middle of what once was slave country in our country. So that's why this can happen, all right?
Were sold to save the Catholic University in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. What is owed to the descendants of slaves who were sold to help ensure the college's survival? There was.
So I want to kind of get back to this idea that the South and white Southerners in particular are going to be very clear in pointing to the Bible as a justification for owning slaves. Again, if you can point to the Bible, if you're a religious people, if you claim to be a religious person, if you claim to be a Christian, and you're pointing to the Bible as your justification, then that's going to do what? It's going to give your argument what? If you're arguing that slavery is okay because it's in the Bible, you're banking on the Bible providing you with your what?
Information. Support.
Your support for that particular belief. No one's going to say at that point in our nation's history that the Bible is wrong. Okay? No one in the South, whites especially, are going to argue in support of slavery being immoral if it's included in the Bible And again, it's justifying in their mind what already is a completely and total way of life in the American South. And they're using the Bible to defend that way of life. They are using the words in the Bible and the Christian Bible to justify the ownership of slaves. Okay? So clergy and religious leaders had a very high place in Southern society. Any questions or comments on that? Did you guys get report cards over the weekend? Okay. Nobody's gotten them? Okay. You got yours in the mail? Okay. All right, good. All right. Let's talk about Southern politicians and government officials. Politicians often came from the planter elite or the professional classes. So, God bless you. The most powerful Southern politicians, not a coincidence, the most powerful Southern politicians are going to be among the most wealthy, and the most wealthy are going to come from the planter class. Again, this is between 1800 and 1860. Okay? They support slavery's expansion to maintain the South's political power in Congress. They want slavery to expand into new territories and new states because they don't want to lose political power. They are hoping to hold on to political power. This is vital to understand why Southerners are wanting to continue to support slavery. They want to maintain political power, and therefore they want slavery to spread to new territories. They know that northern states are becoming more and more gradually opposed to slavery. And they realize that unless they can keep up with the abolitionist movement, and unless they can keep up with the opposite of that, the extension of slavery to new American territories, they know eventually they're going to be outnumbered politically. So they're hoping to maintain political power, okay, in Congress. Also, politicians and government officials are hoping to protect the institution of slavery through legislation. They are hoping to protect slavery through the creation of new laws. I want you to think about laws for just a second. Think about laws. If Southern politicians enact laws that make slavery legal, how does that protect slavery 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road? If they're enacting laws that make slavery legal, what does that insulate the Southern states from potentially down the road? What has to happen for a law to be negated? Or what has to happen for a law to be dismissed? What formal process has to happen, whether it's in a state or whether it's a federal law? What's the process? If a law is passed, for example, making slavery legal in 32 states in 1860, and the president signs that, with the president's signature, it would become what? Okay, it will become law. How does that law become undone? What has to happen?
2/3 vote.
There has to be a what? The law has to be, well, the law has to, it would have to be determined unconstitutional, or the federal government would have to repeal that law. A new Congress, a new Senate, a new House of Representatives would have to repeal that law, cancel that law. So Southerners are looking to protect the institution of slavery by passing laws that will protect it against the interests of Northerners, who again are more and more inclined now as we move toward 1850, 1855, more and more northern states are talking openly and boasting about wanting to accomplish what? Abolishing slavery, or at the very least, if they're not talking about abolishing it, Katie, what are they talking about doing with slavery? If you're a northern politician and you don't want to abolish slavery, you might not want to abolish it, but to maintain political power as a northern member of Congress, you're going to want to stop what? Slavery's what? Spread to new territories. You're going to want to stop the spread of slavery to new territories. And there's a huge difference, ladies and gentlemen. There's a huge difference between people who wanted to stop the spread of slavery and people who want to abolish slavery. People who want to stop the spread of slavery are not necessarily opponents of slavery or not necessarily supporting of equality between black and white Americans. All they're looking to do is stop the expansion of slavery to maintain and hold on to political power. Just like the Southerners are looking to extend their political power into new territories by allowing slavery in new territories, so too Northerners are looking to restrict the extension of slavery into new territories to maintain their political clout and their political power. If you are a Northerner and you oppose the spread of slavery, you could be just as racist and just as bigoted as a Southern slaveholder. The only difference is you don't own slaves. You might not own slaves. Don't equate opposition to slavery spreading to support of equal rights between blacks and whites. Matter of fact, many people who want to stop the spread of slavery, and many abolitionists for that matter, wrap your head around this, guys and girls. Many abolitionists, even people who want to abolish slavery, many of them are bigoted and prejudiced and do not want equality between black and white as much as they just want to abolish slavery. Some abolitionists, some white abolitionists were as racist to the core as any Southern slaveholding white. They just wanted to end the institution of slavery because they felt it was immoral, they felt it was wrong, but that doesn't necessarily equate to all opponents. Now, some opponents of slavery clearly were for equality and were for equal rights and for equal opportunities for people of all races, but not all. Not all opponents of slavery felt that black and white should sit at the same table. Not all opponents of slavery felt that blacks should be able to vote. Not all opponents of slavery felt that blacks should be able to hold public office. Not all opponents of slavery felt that black Americans should be able to serve on juries. Okay? Many people who opposed slavery were opposing slavery on moral grounds, but still felt that blacks were, what's that big I word? Big I word. If you are racist, you tend to think that you are superior and blacks are inferior. Many supporters of abolition felt that blacks were still inferior. Okay? Yes, Haley. I thought she was going to ask an important question on a great topic. Thank you, Haley. All right? Breaking my heart. Jeez. You should have to go to the bathroom break. All right. Next. Let's take a peek at, what slide are we on? 9, coming up on 9? All right, 9. White women in Southern society. Women in Southern white society. All right, let's take a look here. This picture probably captures it best. All right, women, and that's a modern picture. It's probably a recreation of what women would have looked like during this era. Women in Southern society, white women in Southern society, their roles varied depending on their social class. Many women are going to support slavery's expansion because it maintained their social status and their way of life. Again, same applies with men. Regardless of your social class in the American South, if you are a white woman, you are in large numbers going to support, in overwhelmingly large numbers, going to support the institution of slavery. They benefited from the labor of enslaved people. Many women. What would a slaveholder's wife be called? What's the term for a slaveholder's wife? What? Yeah, the mistress. So a mistress on the plantation, you have the master, the husband, the mistress, the wife. The mistress on the plantation would run the home. She would be the runner, or she would maintain the home, but they benefited immensely, the mistress and the mistress's family did, by the institution of slavery with the use of house slaves. If you owned a large enough plantation and you had a big enough home, you had at your disposal as a white woman, you had as many slaves as you needed to do as many tasks or chores that you needed to have done within the home. There's a wonderful scene in a movie. The movie's name escapes me, but a white family is having a meal on the plantation, a holiday meal, a big plantation, hundreds of slaves, and as they're eating the Thanksgiving meal, about 20, 25 white Southerners in the family having their meal, and standing behind each family member at the Thanksgiving meal was a house slave who was there to cater to the needs of each of the persons that he or she was standing behind, right? White Southerners benefited from the labor of enslaved people. They are going to fight to hold on to this because they are directly benefiting from it. Again, most important thing on white women in society, white women in the South are going to support the institution of slavery because it benefits them economically. But I want to throw kind of a monkey wrench in that. Can someone tell me why white women in the South might be sympathetic to the cause of abolition or to the cause of emancipation of slaves?
Because like they know what it feels like to not have rights. So like they get how they feel.
American women, white and black, very good on it. American women are going to have a keen insight into the plight of African American slaves because both groups are going to be marginalized in a society where very few white women and virtually no black women, free or enslaved, are going to have the same rights that American males are going to have, white males. So women, white women especially, are going to have an awareness of this disconnect that exists between both slaves and women who lack rights in American society. Now, I don't want to equate white women and slaves as kind of being in the same situation. They clearly were not in the same situation, but white women would clearly have a better understanding and could be more sympathetic to the African American slave situation because white women did not have a lot of power and political rights in American society at that point also. All right, very good. All right, next slide. Let's finish this up. Slide 10. Reasons for unified support among whites. Reasons for unified support. First off, there's a huge fear that if slavery is abolished, the Southern economy will collapse. Okay? And effectively that will happen when the war ends with the surrender. The Southern economy will be turned upside down. But the reasons that whites are going to unify in their support of slavery is that fear that the economy will collapse. The entire Southern economy was based on the institution of slavery. Okay? Also, there was a belief in white supremacy, the belief that whites were superior and Africans were inferior. And in their minds, whites said, if that is the case, if we are superior to this inferior race, it justifies in their minds the ownership of slaves. It justifies in their minds the ownership of slaves. Furthermore, there was a concern about social upheaval if slaves were freed. We've talked about this. What happens if 1 million, 2 million, 3 million slaves are freed all at once? What happens? What's that noise? Downstairs? What happens if 3 million slaves are freed on a moment's notice in the Southern economy? What happens? With respect to social upheaval, what happens? What shuts down? Plantations. Who does the work? Okay? Who does the work? If slavery is abolished immediately, what happens to the work on the plantations? Who picks the cotton? Who prepares the tobacco? Who prepares the goods to be shipped north? Who is responsible for maintaining the fields? Who is responsible for growing the crops? If slavery ends, the South is concerned that their society will be turned upside down with 3 to 4 million slaves. Now, there was a huge, and I can't really understate this, this is really important. there was a huge fear that if slavery ended, every white person in the American South would be butchered. Whites believed that the worst thing in the world that could happen would be the freedom for slaves, because they feared revenge would be taken on the part of the slaves. They feared that there would be bloodletting all across the American South. So there was a fear of that. Did I mention Thomas Jefferson's quotation to you yet this year about how Jefferson described slavery? Thomas Jefferson, our third president, who owned slaves, described slavery in the following terms. He described slavery as kind of being like holding a wolf by the ears. He described owning slaves as holding a wolf by the ears. You're afraid to hold on to it, but you're also afraid to let it go. Why would you be afraid to hold on to a slave or hold on to slavery? What was Jefferson's point there? It's morally wrong and they know it, so it's wrong on that count. Why is Jefferson reluctant to drop the slave and let the slave go?
Because the Southern needs it.
Ruins the economy.
They need them.
They need them, but more importantly, what's a wolf do? If you're holding a wolf by its ears and he's likening a slave to a wolf, what's the risk to the person holding the wolf if they let the wolf go? Yeah, you're going to get attacked. You're going to get bitten. So this clearly is a concern. Clearly is a concern among whites to hold on to the institution of slavery. Also, there's political pressure and social expectations. You were expected to be considered a member of the upper crust of society. You were expected to own slaves. You were expected to live that lifestyle and to perpetuate that lifestyle. All right? All these are reasons why support for slavery is going to be united among all white Southerners. Now again, my little disclaimer, when I say all white Southerners, do I really mean all? I can think of numerous situations where some people are going to speak out, but there are very, very few and far between in the American South. A number of abolitionists, the Grimke sisters from South Carolina, will oppose slavery on moral and religious grounds. But the number of whites in the South that are going to speak out against slavery is minuscule compared to the number of whites that will speak out against slavery in the North. All right? So the whole abolitionist movement is not going to be a movement headquartered or have a lot of support in the American South. Matter of fact, white abolitionists are going to be as hated as the worst criminals that might exist in the South. White abolitionists were quite literally seen as the devil. They were quite literally seen as the devil by white Southerners. Abolitionists were seen as poisoning the mind of slaves. For all the work that Southerners did to restrict the education of African Americans, for all the slave codes that prevented slaves from learning to read and learn how to write and to be exposed to ideas, abolitionists are to blame in many circles, in many quarters, for slaves knowing about the abolitionist movement, for slaves knowing about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, for all men being created equal. After all, if a slave can't read the Declaration of Independence, which uses the phrase, all men are created equal, how might they have learned that? Someone told them. Someone told them about it. Okay? Someone told them about it. Last slide. Let's get through this. Complex society. Southern white society was diverse but united in supporting slavery. Lots of different white groups in the South. Rich, middle class, poor. Okay? You had yeoman farmers, you had poor farmers, you had sharecroppers, you had the cottonocracy. White society was diverse, many different parts of white society, but they were all united in their support of slavery. Each group had unique motivations tied to economic and social factors. And understanding these groups helps us comprehend the complexities of antebellum Southern society. And there's a word for you, Ava. What do you think that word means? antebellum. Bellum from the Greek meaning war. Understanding these groups helps us comprehend the complexities of antebellum Southern society. So anti, A-N-T-E, not A-N-T-I, but anti, before, means before, it's a prefix meaning before. So we're talking about antebellum means before the American Civil War, okay? Understanding these groups helps us comprehend the complexities of antebellum Southern society. My last question on this topic, how does this unified support for slavery affect the path toward the Civil War? Why, I'm going to throw something at you right now, and we'll end on this topic. Why does white unified support for slavery almost guarantee a Civil War? Why does white unified support for slavery in the South pretty much guarantee that there will be a Civil War? We can't say when it would start, but we pretty much guarantee it'll happen. It's a large group on a controversial topic, and there's not a lot of room for what on the institution of slavery? Not wiggle room. What's that other word for wiggle room? Unless you're absolutely right. What do we call it when each side gives a little? And yeah, there's very little room for compromise on this issue. President Lincoln, final comment. President Lincoln said in a speech before he was elected, he said this, and he was absolutely correct. He said, I don't know what's going to happen, but our country was either going to be a country that allows slavery everywhere or allows slavery nowhere.